oath and the Constitution demands of me for the sake of a partisan end, it would, I fear, expose my character to history's rebuke and the censure of my own conscience. I'm aware that there are people in my party and in my state who will strenuously disapprove of my decision, and in some quarters I will be vehemently denounced. I'm sure to hear abuse from the president and his supporters. Does anyone seriously believe that I would consent to these consequences other than from an inescapable conviction that my oath before God demanded it of me? I sought to hear testimony from John Bolton, not only because I believed he could add context to the charges, but also because I hoped that what he might say could raise reasonable doubt and thus remove from me the awful obligation to vote for impeachment. Like each member of this deliberative body, I love our country. I believe that our Constitution was inspired by Providence. I'm convinced that freedom itself is dependent on the strength and vitality of our national character. As it is with each senator, my vote is an act of conviction. We've come to different conclusions, fellow senators, but I trust we have all followed the dictates of our conscience. I acknowledge that my verdict will not remove the president from office. The results of this Senate court will in fact be appealed to a higher court, the judgment of the American people. Voters will make the final decision, just as the president's lawyers have implored. My vote will likely be in the minority in the Senate. But irrespective of these things, with my vote, I will tell my children and their children that I did my duty to the best of my ability, believing that my country expected it of me. I will only be one name among many, no more, no less, to future generations of Americans who look at the record of this trial. They will note merely that I was among the senators who determined that what the president did was wrong, grievously wrong. We are all footnotes at best in the annals of history, but in the most powerful nation on earth, the nation conceived in liberty and justice, that distinction is enough for any citizen. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor.
All right, Garrett Haake has been with me, and he continues to be with me. He's at Capitol Hill. Joining us as well, New York Times chief national correspondent and MSNBC contributor Mark Leibovich, and Daily Beast columnist and MSNBC political analyst Jonathan Alter. Garrett, let's just bring our viewers up to speed. Mitt Romney is going to vote to convict the president of Article 1 of the impeachment clauses, abuse of power. He will vote to acquit on the obstruction of Congress. This has been something we've been speculating upon for some time, but now he has said that this is going to be what he's going to do. Is it your view that he will be the only Republican to do this?
It is, and Ali, make no mistake about it, we just witnessed something truly historic. Never in a presidential impeachment has a senator of the same party of the president being impeached voted for his removal. You just saw the Mitt Romney there that Republicans, and particularly supporters of his going back to 2010, 2011, have always said was inside there, this man of conscience, someone who's very much guided by his faith, guided by the legacy of his father, the late George Romney, deciding to stand against his party and with what he said was his oath before God to follow his conscience, and in this case, convict this president. I was struck that he said he wanted to hear from John Bolton, not because he hoped Bolton would have more damning evidence of this president's malfeasance, but that Bolton might tell him something that would allow him to acquit this president. You heard it in his voice. You heard it in his calls that he knows he's going to be attacked by his own party, by his own president, but that he felt like this is something he absolutely had to do to be able to keep his head up before God and before his children and his grandchildren. An absolutely historic moment on the Senate floor just now.
What a remarkable thing. Mark Leibovich, you have just published an article in the New York Times about this with Peter Baker, about the decision and how Mitt Romney came to it. He actually laid the argument out quite well. He spoke, I mean, he seemed to be choking up and holding back tears in saying this, but he was making the case about why he understands the consequence of this. He understands understands that he will bear the president's abuse as a result. But he mentioned God, he mentioned his faith, he mentioned his trust in the political system as his justification for doing this.
Yeah, I mean, to reiterate what Garrett said, I mean, this is historic, but it's historic not just because, you know, he is a Republican senator voting against the president in this case. This is also the Republican nominee from 8 years ago, and it does give you an indication of where the Republican Party has evolved from in 8 short years. I mean, Mitt Romney was the last non-Trump nominee of the Donald Trump Republican Party. So I think that itself is a marker. But clearly, and I was impressed by this earlier when I talked to Senator Romney in his office, very emotional day for him, very emotional issue for him. He obviously agonized over this a great deal. He realizes also that the path ahead for him is going to be quite unpleasant from within his party. Now, he does have the benefit of being at the end of his career, not at the beginning of his career, and also has 5 or 4.5 years before his next election campaign in Utah. But still, a momentous moment for a lot of reasons, both symbolic but also, you know, in the final count, and how the president views this and how the country will view this proceeding.
Jonathan, what do you make of it? Mark was just talking about a man at the end of his career. There are a number of people who wondered why Mitt Romney wanted the hassle of joining the United States Senate under a man who has berated him, President Trump. What does this mean? Why was Mitt Romney so influential in this process? And in the end, is Mitt Romney influential in this process? Because as Garrett points out, there will be no other Republicans voting the way Mitt Romney is voting.
Well, I don't think he is influential in the moment, but I think he will be influential in history. He voted to acquit, but he is voting to convict
on one of the articles. On
one of the articles, but he is acquitting himself in the historical record. There's really no doubt about how historians will view all of this. They will view Romney as right and all of his Republican colleagues as wrong. Now, you might ask, well, how can you say this? And all you need to do is just listen to his short floor statement to understand that all of what they've heard over the last couple of weeks points to this decision. And that if you are a person of conscience who's willing to sacrifice your political interests, it's easier for him because he's not up for re-election, then you would come to this conclusion. The burden on the defense was not met, and he walked us through exactly why each of the defense's arguments was fallacious. And he really left very little room for rebuttal in the way he did it in a very cogent fashion. So I think historians will say in 2020, all members of the United States Senate faced a test of conscience and character, and it will tote up which ones passed and which ones failed that test.
And he gets into one of those columns. Garrett, hey, you've covered Mitt Romney in the past, and I guess I'm curious because on one hand, I started off this show by talking about the fact that in what should be a great strong week for Democrats, we are